Right, so yesterday was International Men's Day, and I kind of didn't actually notice until later on in the day when I had already made a video. So I want to make a video about it today, and I have this article pulled up by Forbes that is titled "Should We Be Celebrating International Men's Day?" And the article, I mean, it's more of an opinion article, but it goes over to say, yeah, we probably should, but they don't really take us too strong of a stance either way. I'm not going to go through the article just because I kind of wanted to have a news story to show in the background. And this was like the first one that came up, and there wasn't even very many on it. So basically, what I wanted to talk about was, well, basically the answer to the question in being yes. And for the main reason that men are kind of struggling nowadays. I mean, basically, I mean, the best thing that I think I've ever read on this subject was the boy crisis. And it's a book written by Warren Farrell, and it basically goes to show that men and boys are really struggling out there nowadays, and a lot of it is due to the propping up of women, and that this idea that women are oppressed and need to be propped up to be equal, even though they really don't. And if you think that women need to be propped up and given special treatment, well then you don't really think too much of women, because what you're saying is that, well, the only way that women can be quote unquote equal to men is if they're given unfair advantages or gains or whatever to be equal. And the thing about it is that people like me don't believe that, but yet we're the ones called the sexists. So it's very stupid, and it's just more the left's backwards thinking. And basically, a lot of people wonder, well, why does the left have? I mean, it's mainly the left have this hatred for men, and what's in it for them, basically. And the main thing being is that men, well, first of all, men, especially white men, which is why you always hear about men, specifically white men, attacked in the leftist media, is, first of all, they're overwhelmingly not on the left. So in typical leftist fashion, if you don't agree with us, then you need to be attacked, you need to be denigrated, all this kind of stuff. And the other thing being is that if you have strong men who are confident in themselves, and men who haven't been denigrated and demeaned in every way, shape, and form, well then they're more likely to have strong bonds, to get married, to have kids, all this kind of stuff. And if they're attacked and kept down, then they're going to be more likely to need to be dependent on the government to get by, basically. And if men aren't marrying, well then that's just again more and more reason to need to rely on government to get ahead. If men are strong and free and all this kind of stuff, then they can get a good job, they can earn their living, and they don't need to rely on the government. So, and again, that's basically the left, is that people on the left, that how they their view on things basically is that, or their way of getting elected and their way of continuing to get elected, is to keep people reliant on them. Because if there's no one relying on them, then they don't get votes, because the right generally has the more free market, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, earn your way, lower taxes, all this kind of stuff. And the left, freedom, basically. And the left, well, the only way they can give a normal alternative is to be, well, okay, well, let's get people dependent on the government to get by. Let's lie to people that, in the public schools and on the media and in colleges, that if we don't have the free government health care and welfare and all this stuff, that the poor are going to die and they're not going to be educated and all this kind of stuff. Even though the poor currently, I mean, they're not really getting good health care in Canada. Like, healthcare, it's not that good. Um, the poor aren't helped. I mean, you look at, like I said, the classic examples, the democratically run, the cities that are exclusively run by Democrats at every level of government, the San Francisco's and Los Angeleses of the world. They have tens of thousands of homeless people, but yet they could literally pass any policy they want without any Republican opposition. But yet, have they done anything to change it? Well, no, because And the other thing too is that they know that the majority of their voters aren't. I mean, I know this is a blunt way of putting it, but it's the truth. They aren't smart enough to recognize, to put two and two together, to recognize, well, hey, we've been voting for these guys for generations now, and they haven't done anything to help us. I mean, we're worse off if anything, and yet we're still voting for them. Why is that? Well, again, it doesn't make any sense. But getting back to the Men's Day aspect of it, men have, I mean, contrary to popular belief, women have not been subject. I mean, they have in certain societies, yes, but not in white Western society. Women have not been oppressed, at least compared to men. And for the simple fact, well, when you bring up the ideas, well, how have women been oppressed in the past? Well, they weren't allowed to vote. Well, men had to register for the draft and storm the beaches of Normandy. Are you honestly willing to tell me that you would rather have stormed the beaches of Normandy and had the right to vote than to have not had to do that and had the right to vote and not had the right to vote? Well, I mean, anyone in the right mind would have not wanted to do that and had the right to vote, or not had the right to vote. Sorry, because if you watch Saving Private Ryan, the opening scene of that, you're honestly telling me that you would rather have done that and still had the right to vote than to have not had to do that and not had the right to vote. I mean, again, polls were done in the early to mid 1900s when these things were going on, and I think it was about 3/4 of women did not want to have the right to vote if it came with the draft. So this idea that women were, again, it was a decision that they made, and I guarantee you, if you made a generation of women go fight in the war, that number would have gone up to probably 90%. So the idea that women were oppressed because they didn't have the right to vote is BS. The idea that women were all cooped up in houses having to cook clean and all this kind of stuff, again, wasn't necessarily true. In the early 1900s, women were actually going to college and working at a fairly, I mean, I don't know exactly what the number is, but I was recently reading a book on it, and women were going to college at a decent amount rate higher than they were in like the 50s and 60s. So the reason why women slowly started to not work is because they didn't have to. At least the main reason. Obviously, there's other reasons, but you could have a middle class income. What would today be? I don't know, $70,000, $80,000, and have one person. You could have a middle class house, not have some massive mortgage payment. You could own a car or two. You could go on a holiday or two every year. All this kind of stuff. Nowadays, because of terrible leftist government policies, you can't do that. You can. I mean, it depends where you live. But if you live in a city, more than likely you can't afford on one person on a middle class income salary to have, a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot house that's relatively new, 2 cars, go on a holiday every year. You can't afford that. It's not going to happen. So the idea that women were oppressed because they couldn't work or they weren't working it's a misrepresentation, and it's misleading. They didn't work because they didn't have to. Like if you were married to someone and they were making more than enough for you to get by, well, why would you work? And we know that kids raised by their parents turn out better in every way, shape, and form than kids raised in daycare. And again, this is something that the left will deny, but it's not true, because if that would be the equivalent to going up to your boyfriend or girlfriend or wife or husband and being like, let's say you had on your anniversary, let's say, and you're going to go out for dinner, and then they came and said to you, I'm going to go hang with my friends. I paid some guy minimum wage or some girl minimum wage to go out for supper with you. Well, what would you say? Well, that's not nearly good enough. But if you drop your kids in daycare, and have people paid minimum wage to look after them, like, do you actually think they're going to turn out as good as if you yourself or, your wife or girlfriend raised them? Well, of course not. It makes no sense from a logical perspective. But so that's just kind of the main reasons why. And getting back to the Men's Day, men, almost every measurable difference in society nowadays, men get the short end of the stick. Again, the gender wage gap is a complete myth. So let's just, I mean, and anyone with a brain knows that it's a myth. If you think that it, like, I don't even have words for you. Like, I would respect you more if you believed in the moon landing being a conspiracy than if you believe in the gender wage gap. Like, seriously. Men, much higher suicide rate. I think men commit suicide at 3 to 4 times the rate of women. And if that was happening in society, would people honestly not be talking about it more? Like, if women were committing suicide at 3 or 4 times the rate, would that not be a big issue? Men are the overwhelming majority of workplace deaths. Men actually earn slightly less than women who are. If you look at people in single men and single women actually earn slightly more, and that's not because women are better. I think that's mostly because of all the diversity hiring. That women are more likely to get promoted and get jobs to begin with because of the whole diversity inclusion hiring policies. Again, which if it was happening the other way around, it would be a big issue. The gender wage gap is a complete myth, and people still think it's a big issue. Women actually are earning slightly more, and people don't care. Women earn the overwhelming majority, not the overwhelming majority. I think it's about 60 to 65% of college degrees. Again, even though earnings are actually women, I think it's just a small percentage points. I think like 2 or 3% more than men. Even though women are like 10-15% more likely to earn college degrees, which I think goes to show the how pointless the average college degree is, at least nowadays. So those are just a few of the things off the top of my head. The other thing too to mention that if you read The Boy Crisis, you'll find out about is that there's actually, I believe, I think it's about 19 or 20 in the U.S. Government-funded programs, taxpayer-funded programs that specifically help women, and there isn't one that specifically helps men or boys. And technically, that's against the Constitution because it's sexist in essence, and yet no one cares about that. So I could go on and on. Again, these are all just things I know off the top of my head. Like, if I had my phone up right now, I could be rattling off stuff for hours. So again, that's the other thing too. When I make these videos, this is all stuff off the top of my head. So the fact that there's 19, again, it could be. I know it's in the teens. It might be 17 or 18, but it was a pretty staggering amount of government-funded programs. A lot of these having millions or tens of millions of dollars in funding every year, and yet there isn't one to help men. When men commit suicide at 3 times the rate, men are like 80-90% of homeless out there. And that's the other thing too, is that if women were 80 to 90% of homeless people out there, would people not be making more of an issue of it? Well, of course they would. I would bet a ton of money on that. And when it's men, no one cares. So the thing that bothers me most about this kind of stuff is that whenever the word sexism is brought up, it's immediately thought of as women being the victims in the situation, when in reality it's the complete opposite the overwhelming majority of the time. Is there situations where women are the victims? Of course there is. But it doesn't, exceptions to the rules doesn't mean that rules don't apply. I know people bring up things like, women are more likely to be raped and women are more likely to be robbed, or maybe they're probably not more likely to be robbed, but victims of crimes to where the perpetrator would be looking for someone who isn't as physically strong or physically, imposing. And the thing that I always bring up when I talk about this kind of stuff was, why aren't you guys more gung-ho on concealed carry laws? I mean, in Canada, it's obviously never going to happen, at least anytime soon. And you get this weird double-think look that, okay, well, if you're so concerned about women being victims and getting killed or raped in public, well, then you should be all for concealed carry permits, and yet they don't believe in that kind of stuff. And we know that concealed carry permits lower crime. I mean, if you read More Guns, Less Crime by, I forget the guy's name, but I can see his face in my head. And he goes to show that implementing concealed carry permits, it reduces crime. Now, it's pretty small, but it reduces crime. You look at the states in the U.S. that have constitutional carry, their murder rate is lower than the U.S. average. So this idea that more or less gun control means more crime. It's not true. It's the opposite. And in Canada, we have cities like Toronto that are, in Canada, the national gun control is pretty strict. It's about at least for handguns, it's about as strict as you can possibly come up with rules without having a complete gun ban, and yet gun crime is still going up, even though you have cities like Toronto that are like dedicating, tons of money towards, reducing gun crime, and yet it's not happening. So basically, I've talked quite a bit about this issue, but in short, Men's Day should absolutely be celebrated. It should be talked about more. When the topic of sexism is brought up, you should think of men, not women, and we need to debunk a lot of these conspiracies because, again, the idea that people on the left, that their ideas are so poorly thought through, that if women truly need to be propped up unfairly to become equal to men, well, then what you're saying is that women are inferior to men. And it's the same thing with the whole, racial hiring and stuff like that. That if you truly think women are comparable to men, well, then just give them an equal playing field and let the chips fall where they may. Well, the problem with that is that men would be more likely to get ahead and to achieve higher or achieve more, because men, on average, testosterone, drive, all this kind of stuff, men are more likely to want to be a CEO, to want to be a lawyer, to be a doctor, to be all this kind of the more high stress, or I guess high stress, high reward, I guess, kind of jobs. And women aren't as likely to do that. You look at women are more likely to want to work a part-time job. Women are more likely to want to work jobs that they don't get paid as much. So basically, I'm going to leave it there. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.